I love politically incorrect truths. This is about mass migration. It's called The Truth About Mass Migration. Simple title, no? By the market exit. Let's hear it, because there's obviously a lot of problems with migration into Europe. So let's see.
In 2015, the Libyan civil war, the Syrian civil war, and the war against ISIS in Iraq unleashed a massive humanitarian crisis that forced millions of people to flee for their lives to Europe. This created the so-called 2015 European migrant crisis, a crisis that had huge political ramifications. During the crisis, a large number of refugees fled to my home country, Sweden. And in 2015 alone, Sweden took in as many as 163,000 asylum seekers, which is around 17 refugees per 1,000 inhabitants.
Yeah, that's hardcore.
To compare, that same year, the United States took in 70,000 asylum seekers, which is around 0.2 refugees per 1,000 inhabitants. This surge of refugees to Sweden triggered alarm among some Swedish politicians and experts and international media like The Economist, who all predicted that the migrants would cause huge economic problems for Sweden.
Predictions from the government itself, European Commission, those predictions said that Sweden would be economically hurt by admitting so many refugees, because they said Sweden is spending too much. Predictions were that this would end badly, you could say.
Sure.
This is P.O. Hansen, professor of political science at Linköping University in Sweden and the author of A Modern Migration Theory. In his research, Professor Hansen has looked at what actually happened with Sweden's economy during the migration crisis, and he has compared that to what the politicians and establishment experts around the world predicted.
They were all wrong. What actually happened was that economic activity grew very strongly, and economic growth in Sweden was almost Chinese at this time. In the end of 2015, it grew by I think 4.5% or something, due to the fact that the government spent straight out into the economy. The best and the brightest in the economic field, in the macroeconomic field, they were all wrong.
I have a hard time believing that, and it might be short-term progression, but let's hear what they have to say, because it needs some backing, a claim like that.
I wanted to understand why the politicians and experts' predictions were so wrong. So I traveled from Stockholm to Norrköping to meet Professor Hansen.
Norrköping?
And from our conversation, I realized that the useless predictions about the economic effects of the migration crisis were not isolated errors. Instead, these errors expose deep flaws in the economic models that politicians rely on. Models that fundamentally misunderstand how migration, our economy and society actually works.
Let's hear it. So here's the basic, right? You have a lot of migrants coming in, particularly from the Middle East and areas like this. They take advantage, naturally, of Sweden's benefit systems. So they take more than they produce. That's the argument, right? And so the overall contribution to the country is below zero, in some sense. That's the argument. Is that true? I guess they're saying it's not true and that more has been produced. Now the question is, are they speaking about migration, or have others suddenly produced more for other reasons? That's the argument.
This is downtown Stockholm, and in that building over there is the Swedish Ministry of Finance. And in here we have the Swedish National Financial Management Authority. And in here is the National Institute of...
They all fucking building look the same almost. Look at that. 1, 2, 3. God damn, we make something different.
Of Economic Research. So what do these government agencies have in common? Well, it's that they employ Sweden's best and brightest macroeconomists. But another thing they have in common is that all of them, together with the European Commission, predicted in 2015 that Sweden's economy would suffer badly because of increased costs of migration.
All right.
But what does the cost of migration even mean? When politicians talk about the cost of migration, From where do they get their numbers?
Well, they come from research and the tradition within economics called the fiscal impact of migration. What they simply do, if you put it very simply, is to take the cohort of migrants and then compare that to those who are born in the country, let's say Sweden. And
Well, you can't just take all migrants. You can't take like people coming from other EU countries. That's the distinction you must make, right? I hope they do that.
then they measure how much do the migrants pay in taxes and how much do they get out from welfare systems. And from there they get a number. Cost.
The one thing they're not calculating here is potential crime, even though it's a minority. That's another one. I don't know if welfare systems, I don't think it covers that.
Or benefits.
I doubt it.
That's how simple it is.
Yeah.
And here's another way we can explain this method visually. These economists use a method where they sort the population of, say, Sweden based on how much everyone pays in taxes, which naturally follows from how much they earn. Then these economists draw a line where the average is and then conclude that everyone below the average is a burden or a cost for the people who are above the average. And since migrants are overrepresented in the group of people who earn below average, the economists conclude that they are a cost.
Yeah,
And that's of course a weird
Yeah, that's a bit of a weird way to put it. I mean, yeah.
science, because you can do that for any group in society. You could take women. You could say, well, women make less than men in terms of income. They also then pay less taxes. But can we from that conclude that women are a burden on men? Yes, we can if we apply this literature and this economic research.
In fact, anyone below the average will be a cost for the people who are above the average. A nurse will be a cost and a burden to the CEO of a casino. A kindergarten teacher will be a cost to a banker.
We get the
A
point,
cleaner
no?
will be a cost to an advertising executive.
Sure.
Why? Simply because these people earn below the average.
You have an
Look, if that's the way it was measured, it's dumb. We get it.
average. That's
true.
Mathematically speaking, some people will be above average, some people will be below, and
Well,
some people
of
will be
course.
just average. In this research, you almost get the
Imagine being average. Sad life.
feeling that the message is get over average to everybody, but that's impossible.
Yeah.
I'm a
average.
professor of political science, so during the COVID pandemic, which people did we want more? Professors in political science or nurses? Well, it's obvious, but who is paid more? Well, professors are, but they're not more important, they're not more valuable. And there's a large European study done that could show very clearly that the most important workers during COVID were disproportionately low-skilled, low-paid migrants. And that's really the only statistics you need to understand how absurd this accounting is.
This strange science of considering half the population as costs contributed to the faulty predictions about the fiscal impact of the migration crisis. But there is also another reason we got our predictions so wrong. And that is because we, as we often do, confused symbol with reality.
Man, these long pauses at the end don't work.
We humans, we are masters of symbols. Thanks to symbols like countries, laws, and money, we've been able to build empires, technologies, and economies. But as the British philosopher Alan Watts has noted, the peculiar and perhaps fatal fallacy of civilization is that all too easily we confuse the world as we symbolize it with the world as it is. Money is a way of measuring wealth, but it's not wealth in itself. A chest of gold coins or a fat wallet of bills is of no use whatsoever to a wrecked sailor alone on a raft. In his book, Professor Hansen shows that our inability to distinguish between symbol and reality is also one of the reasons we fail to properly assess the effects of migration. And more specifically, as Professor Hansen notes, we constantly fail to distinguish between real resources, which are reality, and financial resources, which are symbols.
Definitely.
The distinction between real resources and financial resources, that I get from modern monetary theory and that scholarly tradition. We are told that financial resources, that's a scarce resource, and we need to be very careful with how the government spends, otherwise it can be insolvency and bankruptcies and so on. But they flip that and say no, where we have real constraints are within the real resources, meaning people, workers, and knowledge, natural resources. We know that we have those constraints, but we care less about them than the false constraints we say we have with fiscal resources. I think
I've been there, and it's freaking cold. Sweden is cold as hell.
it was John Maynard Keynes who said that what is technically possible to do is always financially possible to do. So meaning if you have the skills, the workers, the real resources, then you can do things. If you don't have them, you can't.
I mean, they're talking about the opposite of fake money, right? Which is being printed every day now, or not every day, but it's being printed often, for example, in the US. Of course, this fake form of money is going to have, in some sense, growingly less value than something that's real. Yeah.
And it doesn't matter how much
or
money.
it'll deteriorate even what might be real, perhaps, like your effort or your time invested into something. Now, when they're talking about resources, that's a different case, I'm sure.
You throw on that, it won't do anything. COVID showed that. We needed more people in the healthcare sector, much more people. And so governments threw money at that.
Vi fattar ett beslut om att låna ut upp till 500 miljarder kronor till bankerna. Räntan på de här lånen är noll. Så det här är i princip gratis pengar.
But that was not enough.
How is that free money when they got to pay it back? That's the opposite of free money. It's just a loan that with no interest. The dumb way to put it, man.
We didn't have the real resources. That was the real constraint. So we had the money, but we didn't have the real resources. And that is so crucial to understand. And migrants then, they are a real resource. And any country who receives real resources, that country is a winner. That's just how crass reality is. Now we have a...
Yeah, but I don't know, man. I need to watch more of this video, because with that argument, you might as well pull the entire world into your country. If that's just real resource. That's the dumb argument. You can't just pull everyone in there. What does that even mean? That's
bit backwards and think that, oh, we who have a net inflow of migrants, we are the losers.
Here in Sweden, where we have a net inflow of migrants, 51% of the bus and tram drivers are foreign-born, 60% of the cleaners are foreign-born. And
this is, man, I'm getting annoyed by this video. Sometimes I like to listen to arguments that are currently against my thinking, because I might learn something. But here I'm just seeing outpoint after outpoint, like things that just don't make sense. Just because they're foreign-born doesn't mean that they're essentially a real resource if you don't look at the past as to why most of them are foreign. Why? Maybe inflation and cost of living has deterred people from taking jobs that are below the standard of Sweden, perhaps, right? And then you have people, this is the same argument, you have people that are willing to work for less or willing to work more menial jobs because it's difficult for them to come with a network and to start with a strong job. Of course they're going to take what they can get. It doesn't mean that others wouldn't do it if the pay was at a level at what it's been maybe 20 years ago, not in dollar, or not in Swedish kroner value, but in good comparison to the standard of living, if that makes sense. Because the standard of living has decreased, the cost of living has increased, and the salary has likely remained not in much difference. And if it has increased, it probably hasn't followed cost of living. So of course you have a people in Sweden, natives, who are used to a certain standard of living that is just like 20 years ago, perhaps, or 30 years ago, and are wondering like, hey, if I get this job, it's not really going to be enough for me, perhaps. Or another argument is even everyone's been funneled through university programs through the state, through benefits, and they're wondering, this mindset is that jobs like that are perhaps less worth it. But just to say, oh, we can pull out the people who make $2 a day in whatever country and make them do any job in our country means they're a real resource. How, man? That's not a good argument, in my opinion. Am I wrong?
30% of the doctors
I'm willing
are
to be
foreign-born.
wrong.
Could anyone argue that Sweden would be better off without these people?
All right, so doctors are definitely a different. They just hoodwinked. They just hoodwinked me with that one. There are definitely some of the immigrants that come in as doctors. There's going to be a part that are high skilled for sure, but that's going to be a minority, right? And maybe the increase in doctors is also due to the increase in immigration. I don't know. In terms of population size, I don't know. Could be anything. I just think everything is so shallow, these statistics. We'd like to know, it would be nice to have a better argument as to why immigration was probably a net benefit to the level at which it's happened. And they're still not separating between, at least not telling us, maybe they have, but they're not separating between, for example, Middle Eastern or perhaps African immigration versus EU immigration. Has that been clarified? Not yet.
It's obvious that the mainstream view that it's costly for countries to receive migrants is misguided. But does this mean that migration is always possible and always desirable?
What's up with these pauses, man? He does a good job, but you know, what the fuck?
I'm very often attacked for saying, well, P or you, so you, with your reasoning, Sweden could take all the migrants in the world and all the refugees in the world.
Impossible.
And I say, no, that's not what I'm saying, and that's not possible. But it's not due to financial constraints. It's due to real constraints. How many people a country can.
Well, it would be financial constraints if you pull out the entire world into your country. You're just going to have, like, what the hell? What are you going to do? There's going to be no way to build enough housing. There's not enough finances to account for this. Anyways, I'll give him a listen. I'm sorry. I'm sure he's an intelligent dude and has a lot to say. And it's just maybe the way the video is edited, which just doesn't give us enough context.
Can accommodate. And that is related to housing, to what kind of healthcare sector we have, schools, and real resource constraints. So that is the limit to how many people a country can receive.
Finance builds that.
And in Professor Hansen's work,
Whatever.
he shows
I get it.
that even during the migration crisis, when Sweden admitted a very large number of refugees, Sweden didn't even come close to its real resource constraints. But Professor Hansen also raises another, often overlooked question that we need to consider when we talk about migration, namely, what effect does migration have for the countries that the migrants are leaving behind?
I mean, it used to be that the EU was the EU, and then there was the rest of the world who wanted to come in. Now the
Just singling out Switzerland there.
EU is 27 countries. Many of those countries are emigration countries, and many of them have suffered what researchers would call demographic collapses. So the Baltic countries, foremost Lithuania and Latvia, but also Romania, Bulgaria, they have some of the highest emigration rates in the world.
Since Romania joined the EU in 2007, approximately 3.6 million people have left the country, which is around 16% of the whole population.
You'd wonder, instead of just having a bunch of immigrants come in to replace this, you'd wonder, why did they leave? Why are they leaving? It's a crazy question, huh? Crazy.
It's gone so far that the Romanian finance minister, Eugene Teodorovici, proposed that Romanians shouldn't be allowed to work in other EU countries for more than 5 years.
A few years ago, I had a Romanian PhD student in a course, and he mentioned this. There was this fire in the discotheque in Bucharest some years ago, and he said, even in Bucharest, the hospitals could not take care of those with burning wounds, so they had to be flown out to Germany and other places. And he said, yeah, they were flown to Germany to get treatment, and probably getting treatment from Romanian doctors. That's how the situation is. And in many places in Romania and Bulgaria, and also other places, you hardly have any doctors or nurses.
Okay, but that does hint to the fact that they're talking about immigration beyond the Middle East, right? If he's talking about Romanians in Germany. So in that case, the whole context of this video changes if it's regarding all immigration. In that case, it wouldn't be so difficult to believe that overall there is a net positive perhaps, but This is why in today's context it's so important to separate the different nationalities and cultures and where people are coming from, who's asylum seekers or refugees versus who's just regular old Europeans moving around. It's a very important distinction to make, otherwise you'll never get to the bottom of it. It's easy to see this video in a total different light now that this is kind of cleared up.
At all. That's part of the internal EU logic. Brain drain is an EU issue. It's not EU versus the rest of the world.
I left the conversation with Professor Hansen feeling that the public discourse about migration is weirdly one-sided and unintelligent. But why is that? How come
I'm sorry, I'm just unintelligent.
politicians try to outcompete each other in trying to restrict migrants while ignoring the real benefits, but also the real drawbacks of migration?
The real benefits and drawbacks of migration.
There are many reasons for that. I would point to just the fact that migration has become this toxic issue, and that very few politicians can really say anything positive about migration.
It would be nice if politicians could just say what they actually think, instead of trying to say exactly what they think will sway the voter. It's getting annoying.
Employment rates for the foreign-born,
it's always been like that, right?
They have increased dramatically. So the foreign-born in Sweden now, they have...
It says record unemployment among invandras, like immigrants. I don't know if that's for... It says Samuel Burr from Eritrea was unemployed for many years before. I don't understand more. I speak Danish, I don't speak Swedish, but hey, I can understand some of it. I don't know if this is particularly for a certain country or certain area of the world. That's why it's so difficult to watch this video and give an opinion, right? Because overall, sure, maybe there's a positive.
A higher employment rate than the general employment rate in the EU as a whole. That is very significant and very positive. At the same time, we have unemployment going down dramatically over the recent past for the group foreign-born. And the interesting thing is that no one is taking credit for this very positive development. And I think that says a lot about where we are with this issue.
That's why I want to call this video Politically Incorrect Views on Migration. I'm Andres Aspero, and this is The Market Exit. I will let Professor Hansen say a few more words about his book, A Modern Migration Theory. But before that, there's something I need to tell you. So I love making video essays like this, and
you do good.
This may sound
Beautiful
presumptuous,
videos.
but I believe that what YouTube needs more of is ambitious, original content that takes a lot of effort to make. But for me to keep making video essays like this, I am going to need your support. So that's why I ask you to share this video, to comment on it if you agree with it or if you disagree with it. Click the like button and also subscribe to the channel. And if you really like what I do, and if you have a few dollars to spare, please consider supporting me at patreon.com/themarketexit. Everything helps. And to my existing patrons, thank you very much for supporting this project. All right, now let's hear from Professor Hansen.
So A Modern Migration Theory, it also came out in Swedish, and that's called the Migrationsmyten, the migration myth. Yeah, the book is basically my attempt to change the agenda on the economics of migration and to disprove the assumption that migration somehow is a cost and show that that is not the case. It's not a fiscal issue, it's not an affordability issue. Rather, it's an addition of real resources. And so I just wanted to make that very clear. And then once we get that affordability stuff out of our way, we can talk about migration from a real perspective.
Thank you for sharing your thoughts, guys. You know why I have so many tabs and problems with tabs? Because I look at a video like this and I'm like, oh, that's pretty interesting. Anyways, let's read some comments. That's from them. We need to stop looking at GDP. I agree, 100%. I am Irish, and the GDP in Ireland grew tremendously during my early working years, much better than my parents' time. But I am worse off than them, yet more educated and with a better job than they had. GDP is only a measure for wealthy people, homeowners, business owners who can employ cheap labor, not deal with labor laws, etc. What is wrong with being more like Japan, a degrowth, stagnant economy? It makes no difference to me if my pay increases, but the price of everything else increases. In Japan, they protest over a change in price. Romanian here. I must say that they misrepresented the story about our healthcare system. Okay, let's hear it. Although there is no denial that Romania suffers from a brain workforce drain, that is not the real reason why many patients were sent abroad for treatment. It is endemic corruption. Nurses and doctors couldn't work properly due to bad conditions in hospitals, drug shortages, and last but not least, mismanagement. All right, interesting take. I'm not Romanian, and I've never been. I didn't know this, so thanks for sharing. The great Peregrine. I feel like we've regressed as a species if we think that reality is more important than finance. Well, sure. The most important thing about immigration is not economics, it's culture and values. Without those, we don't even have a society. This is also a really good point. There's more to life than a political philosophy based on number go up. I agree. I guess they were talking more about unemployment wasn't exactly a problem, or that there was, it's true. You can't, because I mean, think about it. Sweden has many no-go zones now. And trust me, like, it's not necessarily Eastern Europeans running those no-go zones. Let me just put it that way. No-go zones in Sweden. That's insane. Just 20 years ago, no-go zones in Sweden is insane. If you know anything about Scandinavia. Why was economic growth the chosen metric to evaluate the impact of immigration? Exactly. You didn't mention other important factors like Gini coefficient, which measures inequality. A March 2023 article in The Lancet reported that Sweden now ranks last among Nordic countries in this regard. Over the past decade, Sweden's Gini coefficient, I wonder if that's how you say the abbreviation, has risen from mid-20s to mid-30s, indicating growing inequality. While the wealthy benefit from cheaper labor, this deepens societal divides. Migrants are often exploited, and the average Swede faces worsening economic conditions. Shouldn't we consider the broader and social costs as well? I agree. The problem with this video, and although I'm sure they're very intelligent, and probably his book has a lot more to say, it's just that this video is very shallow in terms of all the connectivities regarding immigration. You can't just take it from a financial perspective. But I guess that's the one topic they're trying to tackle. But then even without separating migration from different areas of the world, it's a bit unfair as well. A thought, because I mean, Europeans have been going to other European countries since forever. I mean, but the influx of Middle Easterners is relatively a new thing in the scale that it is happening. A thought-provoking response to the actual question of migration rather than a knee-jerk response, and much appreciated. Sure, your comments about real resources in times of COVID reminded me of a conversation I had with my brother several years ago while I was undergoing chemotherapy for lymphoma. He said that if money could fix something, then it isn't a problem. Money is rarely the actual resource. All right, let's see. One person says it's wrong. The professor there is completely wrong. It's shocking how a professor could be so incorrect. Government spending may inflate GDP figures, but it is actually a cost since the citizens must fund it. It is a cost on people that they otherwise would not have to bear. Without all the economic migrants coming into Europe, native European citizens' quality of life would be higher, their wages would be higher, and their country would be better. This is irrefutable. All right. I mean, look, this is such an interesting topic. It's difficult to make. I think I would argue that it's a bit irresponsible to make a video like this in today's context without separating the different types of migration. That's what I think. What do you think? Are you living in Europe? Are you from Romania? What do you think about how they shat on your country with the hospital thing?